Currently, the police and military are out in the streets of Bangladesh with their guns blazing and smoke screens thrown everywhere. Their enemy? Students from all over the country who cry for equality in the job market.
Over the past week, students marched on the streets against quotas in government jobs.
This July 2024, the Prime Minister's office has imposed a nationwide curfew because of the riots. Student leaders have been arrested by the police, and a digital shutdown was implemented, which means the citizens of Bangladesh are offline amidst all this chaos. Even non-protesters are feeling the impact of the riots, but the government remains firm in controlling the protests and coping with harsh regulations. What is the quota system in Bangladesh, and why are the protesters fighting for their lives in order for this system to be abolished? The quota system in Bangladesh has been an insistent issue, especially concerning government job reservations. Historically, 30% of government jobs were reserved for family members of freedom fighters who participated in the 1971 war for independence from Pakistan. This quota aimed to honor the contributions of those who fought for the country's liberation. But ever since July 1st, university students have been protesting nationwide, calling for the elimination of quotas in government jobs. This demand follows the High Court's reinstatement of a rule that reserves almost 1/3 of positions for the descendants of those who were part of the country's 1971 liberation movement. To help you visualize it better, here's the latest quota system as of 2018. 30% of these jobs are reserved for the children and grandchildren of freedom fighters. Additionally, 10% of the jobs are allocated to women, promoting gender diversity in the workforce. Another 10% is designated for individuals from backward districts, aimed at addressing regional inequalities. Minority groups are allocated 5% of the jobs, ensuring their representation, while 1% is reserved for physically challenged individuals, supporting inclusion for people with disabilities. The remaining 44% of the jobs are open to all candidates based on merit, focusing on selecting the most qualified individuals regardless of their background. This quota system reflects a significant effort to balance historical recognition, regional disparities, and inclusivity, while still maintaining a portion of positions open to merit-based competition. Bangladesh, despite significant economic growth, with an average annual increase of 6.25% over the past 2 decades and a reduction in poverty from 11.8% in 2010 to 5% in 2022, faces a severe job crisis for university graduates. The country's marked improvements in human development and its upcoming graduation from the United Nations list of least developed nations in 2026 contrast sharply with the acute shortage of employment opportunities, particularly for educated youth. The 30% job quota reserved for descendants of freedom fighters only fuels the fire by limiting job prospects for a significant working-age population, highlighting a critical challenge amid Bangladesh's economic successes. Here's a graph depicting the youth unemployment rate in Bangladesh from 2004 to 2024, focusing on individuals aged 15 to 24 who are currently without work. The data shows a fluctuating trend, with the unemployment rate rising significantly after 2014, reaching a peak around 2020. In 2023, the rate decreased by 0.3 percentage points to 12.27%, down from the previous year. Despite this slight improvement, the graph highlights the persistent challenge of youth unemployment in the country, indicating a substantial portion of the young workforce remains unemployed. This is why the protesters in Bangladesh are advocating for the reformation of the quota system, which they believe disproportionately benefits the descendants of freedom fighters while excluding long marginalized communities. They seek structural changes that provide welfare measures for these excluded groups rather than a complete abolition of the quotas. Human rights groups and civil society organizations are encouraged to support this movement to ensure the demands for necessary reforms are met. The movement calls for an organized leadership to sustain efforts and push for comprehensive changes, including better representation for gender and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and historically marginalized communities like Bihari Muslims. The protesters emphasize that the system needs reform, not abolition, to achieve a just and equitable society. Bangladesh Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan confirmed on July 28th that there were about 147 deaths during the student protests over the job quota. Although the Supreme Court suspended the new ruling on quotas last week, students vowed to continue protesting until it is permanently overturned. They blocked highways and railways and breached police barriers across Dhaka. The protests turned violent on Monday night when police and heavily armed members of the Bangladesh Chhatra League, or BCL, the Awami League Party's student wing, attacked the students. In Dhaka, police used tear gas and batons, while pro-government groups assaulted protesters with machetes, bamboo rods, and hockey sticks, causing thousands of injuries. Paramilitary forces were also deployed nationwide. Current Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina referred to the protesting students with the derogatory term Razakars, which denotes those who betrayed the nation by collaborating with Pakistan during the 1971 War of Independence. If the grandchildren of freedom fighters don't receive quota benefits, should the grandchildren of Razakars? Hasina remarked. This comment incited anger among the student protesters, who accused Hasina of authoritarianism. We are not Razakars. If anyone fits that description in this context, it is the Prime Minister herself and her forces who are steering this country toward a dark era, said Rakib, 17, a student at Dhaka City College who participated in the protests. Following the unprecedented violence unleashed by the government, the protests have expanded beyond the initial demand for the cancellation of the quota system. An underground press release has circulated a list of additional demands from the students. They call for the Prime Minister to take responsibility for the mass killings of students and issue a public apology. They also demand the resignation of the Home Minister and the Minister of Road, Transport and Bridges, who is also the Secretary General of the Awami League, along with the dismissal of police officers present at the sites of the killings. The Vice Chancellors of Dhaka, Jahangirnagar, and Rajshahi universities are also asked to resign. Furthermore, they want the arrest of police and goons who attacked students and those who incited these attacks, as well as compensation for the families of the killed and injured. They seek a ban on the Bangladesh Chhatra League, or the BCL, the pro-government student wing, and the establishment of a student union. They also demand the reopening of all educational institutions and residence halls, and assurances against any academic or administrative harassment of protesters. The pressure on Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina continues all while she continues to be criticized for her response to the chaos. Amid the violent clashes between police and university students in Bangladesh, which have resulted in deaths, Prime Minister Hasina has faced criticism for allegedly showing insincere sympathy. Following the destruction of a metro rail station during the protests, Hasina was photographed crying at the site, which many perceived as crocodile tears. Critics argue that her display of emotion for the damaged infrastructure contrasts sharply with her lack of visible concern for the students who were killed. Online backlash has accused her of using the incident to divert attention from the deaths and unrest. Despite these criticisms, Hasina has blamed political opponents for the violence and defended her government's actions, including the imposition of a curfew for public safety. Bangladesh has seen significant economic growth over recent decades, with its GDP rising from $6 billion to over $450 billion, and per capita income increasing from $128 to over $2,700. Achieving lower middle income status in 2015, the country aims to become a middle income nation by 2031 and a developed one by 2041. To reach these goals, Bangladesh must adapt to the fourth industrial revolution and address labor market issues. Despite increased female labor force participation, it remains about half the male rate, with women often holding low-level, insecure jobs. Additionally, while the labor force grew from 40.7 million to 72 million, between 2000 and 2022, this growth rate fell short of projections made in the 7th and 8th five-year plans. In 2024, Bangladesh is expected to have an unemployment rate of 5.09%, with approximately 3.98 million people unemployed. The employment rate is forecasted to be 51.28%, and the total labor force is projected to be around 78.26 million. Labor productivity is anticipated to be $2.75, while the total population is expected to reach 174.70 million, with 33.73 million households. Poverty levels remain high, with 5.11% of the population earning less than $2.15 per day, 30.07% earning less than $3.65 per day, and 72.93% earning under $6.85 per day. These forecasts suggest that while Bangladesh's labor force and employment figures are growing, significant challenges remain. High poverty rates and low labor productivity highlight issues that could impede economic advancement, indicating a need for targeted economic and labor market reforms to improve living standards and economic stability. Despite recent economic stability and rising GDP, lower income groups in Bangladesh still face significant challenges, including low life expectancy and high infant mortality rates. These issues hinder the country's progress toward becoming a developed nation. In 2018, the World Bank saw Bangladesh as a promising example for other developing countries aiming to overcome poverty. Bangladesh has made notable strides in reducing poverty, with the proportion of people living on less than $1.90 a day dropping from 44.2% in 1991 to 13.8% in 2017. Life expectancy, literacy rates, and food production have all improved, driven by over 6% economic growth annually, peaking at 7.3% in 2017. This growth helped Bangladesh achieve lower middle income status in 2015 and meet the criteria to graduate from the UN's least developed countries list by 2024. However, rapid urbanization and increased demand for energy and transport have created serious infrastructure challenges. Bangladesh's progress is both inspiring and challenging for development policymakers. While the country has achieved remarkable gains in income and human development, it must address barriers to higher growth, such as inadequate power access, poor transportation, limited land availability, complex regulations, and vulnerability to climate change. The economic factors influencing Bangladesh's development, such as the need for improved infrastructure, higher labor productivity, and enhanced human capital, underscore the importance of abolishing the current quota system. The persistence of the quota system, which reserves a significant percentage of government jobs for certain groups, restricts merit-based employment opportunities and slows down the potential for a more equitable job market. Furthermore, the quota system in Bangladesh perpetuates a crony environment by fostering a system where job opportunities are allocated based on political connections rather than merit. This practice aligns with the principles of crony capitalism, where businesses and individuals benefit from close ties with state power through anti-competitive regulations, direct government benefits, and corruption. Instead of thriving through fair market competition, opportunities are monopolized by those with political affiliations, leading to an economy where profits are made through schemes between business and political elites. Removing the quota system would allow for a more efficient allocation of resources, encourage skilled individuals to enter the workforce, and foster economic growth by aligning employment practices with the needs of a rapidly evolving economy. This shift is essential for unlocking the full potential of Bangladesh's labor force and supporting its continued progress toward development. The current protests represent the most significant challenge Prime Minister Hasina has faced since winning her fourth consecutive term in the January elections, which the main opposition party boycotted, claiming a severe crackdown on their members. In response, Hasina has ordered a judicial investigation into the deaths and urged protesters to wait for the Supreme Court's decision. I especially urge everyone to wait patiently until the Supreme Court verdict comes. I believe our students will get justice from High Court. They will not be disappointed, Hasina said during a press conference on Thursday. Since coming to power in 2009, Prime Minister Hasina's Awami League has largely fallen short of its job creation promises. Although the public sector workforce in Bangladesh has grown over the past 20 years, and civil servants have seen regular raises and better benefits, securing these jobs has become increasingly politicized. The implicit agreement, where the government was expected to ensure employment and control living costs in exchange for the youth's compliance, has been undermined. Prime Minister Hasina's proposed budget has been disappointing for job seekers, particularly young people. There were high hopes for increased funding for jobs and quality education, but the national budget failed to address these needs effectively. A recent survey by the Center for Policy Dialogue, titled New Government, National Budget, and Citizens' Aspirations, identified the top priorities as decent jobs, quality education, and social protection. Of those who emphasized the need for decent jobs, nearly half sought reduced unemployment, while a third wanted more job opportunities. However, this year's budget did not align with these priorities, despite the Awami League's 2024 election manifesto prioritizing job-oriented education and employment for youth, and past promises of reducing unemployment and improving youth prospects. The proposed budget has failed to deliver on these commitments. Over the last 15 years, numerous policies and initiatives have been introduced to address youth employment, such as the National Youth Policy 2017 and the National Skills Development Policy 2011. However, the reality remains stark. Youth unemployment is over 10%, and the rate of those not in education, employment, or training, or NEET, is nearly double the global average. The high NEET rate has risen from 28.9% in 2017 to 39.88% in 2022, and university graduates continue to face high unemployment. This disconnect between pro-youth rhetoric and tangible outcomes suggests a practice of youth washing, where political promises are made for publicity without resulting in real change. Youth washing refers to the practice of making superficial or symbolic gestures to appear supportive of young people's issues without implementing substantive changes or addressing their real needs. The youth in Bangladesh have increasingly felt that they have been youth washed as the government's promises and policies appear more focused on creating a favorable public image rather than addressing their genuine needs. The protests have shifted the political landscape by revealing the government's harsh response and the perceived unfairness of the quota system. This change in dynamics may prompt the government to become more inclusive and responsive, addressing the concerns of both the protesters and the wider public. What will I do with quota reform now? This government has used so much violence to suppress us. We want justice for our fallen brothers and sisters, Habib, one of the protesters, said in an interview. There were not only police, but also people from the ruling party who were wearing helmets and were firing live bullets towards us. The crisis has been largely fueled by the government's actions. The harsh initial crackdown and disparaging comments from high-ranking officials about the protesting students have only escalated tensions, leading to larger demonstrations and broader demands from student leaders. On July 18th, the situation peaked when students called for a nationwide shutdown and police clashed with protesters. In response, the government, aiming to disrupt protest organization, decided to cut off the internet nationwide, impacting 170 million people. Despite this, the protests intensified, especially in Dhaka, where many outraged citizens joined the student movements. Prime Minister Hasina then imposed a strict curfew, confined citizens to their homes, deployed the army with shoot-on-sight orders, and saw over 100 people killed between July 19th and 21, along with several protest leaders being abducted. The violence during the protests in Bangladesh could generate significant global pressure on Prime Minister Hasina, as images of brutal crackdowns and human rights abuses spread internationally. They may attract scrutiny from foreign governments, human rights organizations, and global media. This global spotlight can amplify calls for accountability and reform, compelling the Prime Minister to address the situation more seriously to mitigate further diplomatic and reputational damage. Furthermore, the protests have already caused a notable economic impact, especially in regions reliant on Bangladeshi customers. For example, the new market area in Kolkata has experienced a sharp drop in business due to the lack of Bangladeshi shoppers, underscoring the economic interdependence between Bangladesh and its neighboring countries. Ultimately, the government may be compelled to yield to the protests and either reform or entirely abolish the quota system in response to mounting pressure from demonstrators. However, the outcome of the current standoff between the government and protesters remains uncertain. While the escalating unrest and public outcry could force the authorities to address the grievances, it is still unclear which side will prevail in this intense conflict. The situation continues to unfold, leaving the resolution of this standoff and its implications for the future in question. Thank you for watching.